Two things can be true at the very same time simultaneously. This sounds obvious, but people are terrible at this. For example, consider the word woke and wokeness. There's no more loaded term right now in politics than woke. For people on the left, progressives, this word came to mean something like being aware of and opposed to systemic racism and sexism, these kinds of things. Here's the Collins Dictionary. It says, someone who's woke is very aware of social and political unfairness. Well, if that's what you mean by woke, it is good to be woke. But when conservatives say the word woke, they really mean too woke. And it is bad to be too woke. Why is it bad to be too woke? Well, if the only lens through which you can view the world is that of social oppression, then you're going to see social oppression everywhere, and you're going to misdiagnose it in places, which will lead you to propose solutions that not only don't help, but in many cases might actually hurt the group that you're trying to help in the first place. Okay, so conservatives out there listening to this right now are going to be like, wait a minute. No. There's no systemic oppression left in the U.S. That's nonsense. That's just some hoax concocted by SJW libtards who have nothing better to do than harass people with their white savior complexes. And the progressives out there are going to be like, ho, too woke? You can't be too woke. How can you be too aware of systemic oppression and opposed to it? The demonizing of the word woke was just something that QAnon MAGA fascists did to try to halt social progress for minority groups. I think both of those takes that I just gave, those are caricatures, but I think both of them are bad. I'm going to try to give some evidence why. So the whole point of this video is to make the claim it is good to be woke, if you use the original definition that I was using, and it is bad to be too woke. So again, conservatives and progressives out there, both going to hate this video. Why am I making a video that everyone's going to hate? I don't know. I guess I'm dumb. Joke's on me. But let me submit some evidence for why I think it is good to be woke and it is bad to be too woke. Okay, first to the conservatives. If you're like, there's no systemic oppression out there anymore, well, consider the veil of darkness studies. So it's found that police pull over black drivers on average more often than white drivers on a per capita basis. I mean, there's more white drivers out there, so they get pulled over more, but per capita, black people get pulled over at a higher rate than white people. If you're not woke enough, right? If you're not woke at all, you might be like, that's just because black people probably don't drive carefully enough, or they're more reckless, or they're driving faster, or their cars are in disrepair, and so they got like missing tags or something, and that's why they get pulled over. Well, people have done veil of darkness studies. So what they do is they study how do the police pull over black people right after dusk happens, after the sun goes down, and right beforehand. And it's found that right after dusk, the rate of percentage of stop drivers who are black goes down by about 3% compared to after dusk compared to before dusk. So black people are pulled over less often after the sun goes down. Why does this matter? Well, if it was simply a case of, if you were like, oh, black people just drive bad, well, that shouldn't affect it. The fact that it's dark out shouldn't affect that. The car's in disrepair, that shouldn't necessarily affect it. Like maybe you can't see it or whatever. I mean, this looks like a plausible case where it's plausible at least that police will not be able to see the race of the driver, and maybe they're not being able to factor that in. So it's possible that there's some subconscious bias on police officers that they pull over black people more often. I'm not saying it's conscious. It might just be subconscious. But that's at least a plausible explanation for this 3% gap here. There might be other explanations. We should study this more to try to figure out what's going on. But if you weren't woke enough, you might be like, well, I wouldn't even look for this. We wouldn't even find this. But we should look into this more to find out. This is at least a plausible case of a potential systemic racism in society. What's another example? Well, the National Bureau of Economic Research did a study. They sent out 83,000 fake resumes to employers. And they did something clever. They used white-sounding names and they used black-sounding names. So they used like distinctively black-sounding names, and it was found that the white-sounding names on the resumes got called back by employers at about 25%, and the black-sounding name resumes only got called back at 23%. So you had a 2% penalty for having a black-sounding name in your resume. This, again, seems like a plausible case of racism, systemic racism in our society. Again, the number's small. The penalty was only 2%, 25% compared to 23%. Or over here, you could round up 26% compared to 23%. So again, like if you're not woke enough, you might not discover this at all. You might be surprised. Oh, wow, there might still be some lingering systemic racism in our society. If you're too woke, you might be surprised. You might be like, wait, it's only like a penalty of 3%. Even in the Veil of Darkness studies for the driving, it was only like a penalty of 3%. The rate only went up by like 3% before dusk compared to after dusk. So these are studies, show some evidence. It looks plausible that there's still some systemic racism in our society. The good news is it appears to be smaller than some people might have thought, but still it's there. We should work to correct it if we can. So it's good to be woke to these things to try to correct them if we can. Now, even in this resume study, it's not a definite that it's racism. Some people have hypothesized that the traditionally black sounding names might be associated with lower economic status, and employers might actually be biased against poor people and not just black people. Then again, if you're associating black people with poor people, you could argue that's systemic racism anyways. It'd be interesting, though, if someone could run this study again with traditionally hillbilly sounding names. If you could do this study and you got like Cletus and Jedediah in there to see if there's also a penalty for having a socioeconomically poor sounding white name, that would be interesting. Regardless, it's bad that traditional black names are getting penalized. We should be aware of that. We should try to fix it. So good to be woke to these problems so we can fix them. So that's to the conservatives, and that might be surprising to you. For the progressives, you might be like, oh, hold on, I don't believe that overly wokeness is a problem. Well, it's a problem. Check it out. So there's the Advancing Health Equality. The American Medical Association came out with a guide to language, narrative, and concepts. Whew. This was in, 2020. I'll put the link in the description. Anyways, they offer some words that are problematic, and they offer alternatives to those words. One of them is like minority. They say you shouldn't try to use minority anymore. You should use historically marginalized, minoritized, or BIPOC, black, indigenous, or people of color. That's a problem, though. These are two different concepts. Not every minority is historically marginalized. A lot of them are. Like, black Americans have been historically marginalized. But not all minorities are historically marginalized, so you can't just replace this term. Red-haired people are a minority. They're not historically marginalized as far as I know of, and they're not black, indigenous, or people of color. So that's a problem. Another problem is they suggest to replace the word vulnerable with oppressed. This is a problem. These are two different concepts. Just because you're vulnerable doesn't mean you're oppressed. Many oppressed groups are vulnerable, but not all things that are vulnerable are oppressed. These are the kinds of changes that I would expect someone to make that's too woke, i.e. the only lens through which they can view the world is that of social oppression. So like there's a problem up here. They suggest replacing the word social problem with social injustice. But it's like, not all social problems are social injustices. Many of them might be, but if you just conflate these ideas together, you've left no room. In other words, everything's going to look like a social oppression to smash when all you own is a woke hammer. So you got to be careful with this. Is bad. This is just muddying the water and likely making things worse. So that's a problem. I mean, there's lots of these problems. Another problem is that Roald Dahl, maybe you heard this, a company, Puffin Books, bought the rights to Roald Dahl's children's books. What could be the problem? Well, they hired out a contractor to go figure out if there's any problematic stuff in there. And they made some changes. They made a change to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Instead of describing Augustus Gloop as enormously fat, they just called him enormous. Maybe so that they're not fat shaming. However, the whole point of that character is that he's fat. So you've kind of ruined the story by leaving that out. Also, instead of calling the Oompa Loompas small people, or instead of calling them small men, they called the Oompa Loompas small people. And it's like, female representation in the Oompa Loompas really anywhere on our top 100 list of things we need to fix or address? Would that have actually caused any harm? Would a girl reading Charlie and Chocolate Factory be like, damn it, I could never become an Oompa Loompa. I'm not even going to try now. I'm socially oppressed. This is a sexist book. I don't think they would have. They're just ruining a perfectly good book in the name of over-wokeness. So, two things can be true at the same time. It's good to stay woke, and it's bad to stay too woke.